The morning sun crept softly through the lace curtains of Martha's modest Ohio home, casting gentle patterns on the well-worn quilt that covered her bed. She sat up slowly, a quiet hope fluttering in her chest. It was her birthday, her 76th, and though the day began like any other, Martha secretly wished for a call, a visit, or even a simple happy birthday message from her children or grandchildren. She had spent decades pouring love and care into her family, raising her children with tireless devotion, nurturing her grandchildren with endless patience, and always placing their happiness above her own. Yet, as the hours slipped by and her phone remained silent, the hollow ache of neglect settled in like an unwelcome shadow. Martha's morning ritual was the same as it had been for years. A cup of chamomile tea, a quiet moment by the window watching the birds, and a slow walk to the garden where the roses she had planted still bloomed with stubborn beauty. But today, the usual comfort of routine was pierced by a growing sense of abandonment. She thought back to birthdays past, to the laughter of children gathered around her kitchen table, the scent of freshly baked cake, and the worn greeting cards filled with heartfelt messages. Those memories felt distant now, like echoes from a life that was slipping away. She picked up the small photo album resting on the worn armchair beside her bed, a collection of snapshots that chronicled a lifetime of sacrifices and love. There was a picture of her holding her newborn daughter, eyes filled with hope and promise. Another showed her at a family picnic, smiling beside her husband who had passed years ago. And then photos of her grandchildren, faces radiant with joy, arms wrapped around her in warm embraces. Each image was a testament to the countless hours she had spent building a family, nurturing bonds that now seemed fragile and frayed. The day wore on, and Martha's phone remained stubbornly silent. She stared at it as if willing it to ring, to buzz, to break the oppressive quiet that had settled over her home. She tried to dismiss the growing sadness, telling herself that maybe her family was busy, that perhaps they had simply forgotten. But deep down she knew the truth was far more painful. They had chosen to ignore her birthday, to turn away from the woman who had always been their anchor. By mid-afternoon, the loneliness felt unbearable. Martha sat in her favorite chair, wrapped in a soft shawl, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped the photo album to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes, not from anger but from a profound sense of loss. She had spent a lifetime putting others first, sacrificing her own needs and dreams so that her family could thrive. And now, on a day that was meant to celebrate her life, they had left her invisible. The silence was shattered when her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stopped by with a small bouquet of wildflowers picked from her garden. "Happy birthday, Martha," she said softly, placing the flowers on the kitchen table. It was a kind gesture, yet it only deepened the sting of her family's neglect. Martha smiled weakly, grateful for the kindness but aching for the love she had longed for from her own blood. That evening, Martha sat at the dinner table alone, the flickering candle casting shadows on the empty chairs that once held her children. She reached for the phone again, fingers hovering over the keypad as she debated whether to call them first. The thought of hearing excuses or dismissals made her hesitate. Instead, she decided to wait one more day, hoping for a sign that mattered. But the next morning, fueled by a mix of hurt and determination, Martha made a decision. She would no longer sit in silence, waiting for a family that had turned its back on her. She would confront them, not with anger, but with the quiet strength that had carried her through decades of hardship. She would tell them how deeply their neglect had wounded her, and she would demand the recognition she deserved. With the photo album clutched tightly, Martha picked up the phone and dialed her eldest daughter's number. The line rang several times before it was answered with a distracted "hello." Martha's voice was steady but tinged with quiet pain as she said, "It's Mom. I'm calling because it's my birthday, and I haven't heard from any of you. I need to know why." There was a pause, a hesitation that spoke louder than words. Then her daughter replied tersely, "We've all been busy, Mom. You know how things are." But Martha's heart knew this was a shallow excuse, a shield for deeper distance that had grown between them. "I just want to understand," Martha said softly. "I raised you, cared for you, and now it feels like you don't even remember me on this day that means so much." The line went silent again before the call ended abruptly. Martha sat back, the weight of rejection settling over her like a winter chill. Yet beneath the sadness, a spark of resolve ignited. She would not let this be the end of her story. If her family would not celebrate her, she would find another way to honor herself. As dusk fell, Martha looked out her window at the quiet street bathed in the soft glow of twilight. The world outside seemed to hold a promise she was determined to find. She opened the photo album once more and traced the faces of those she loved, reminding herself that her worth was not defined by their neglect. Tomorrow, she decided, she would take the first step toward reclaiming her voice and her life. That night, as Martha lay in bed, the silence around her was no longer just an echo of loneliness but the calm before a storm of change. The birthday that had begun with heartbreak was about to become the catalyst for a journey she never imagined. A journey toward healing, strength, and a new understanding of family. The morning after her quiet confrontation with her daughter, Martha awoke with a mixture of lingering sorrow and a flicker of determination. The silence from her family still echoed loudly in her mind, but beneath it stirred a restless energy she hadn't felt in years. She spent the early hours reflecting on the years she had devoted to her family, the countless meals prepared, the sleepless nights spent nursing sick children, the holidays she orchestrated with loving care. Those sacrifices, once quietly accepted, now felt overshadowed by the cold distance that had grown between her and the one she loved most. Martha's heart ached not only from the empty birthday, but from the realization that the threads holding her family together were fraying, tangled in misunderstandings and unspoken grievances. She recalled the subtle signs she had ignored, the missed calls, the curt answers, the way her presence at family gatherings had become less frequent, less expected. Had she been too forgiving? Had she allowed hurts to fester beneath the surface, too afraid to speak up? The questions circled relentlessly, refusing simple answers. Determined to understand, Martha began to sift through memories, both joyful and painful. She remembered the times she had shielded her children from harsh realities, choosing to bear burdens alone so they could flourish. But she also acknowledged moments when her own voice had been quieted, when she had swallowed resentment to preserve a fragile peace. The loneliness she felt now was not sudden. It had been creeping in unnoticed until it filled the space between them. By midday, the ache of isolation was unbearable. Martha sat in her sunlit living room, clasping her hands tightly, willing herself not to break down. She thought about reaching out again, but the wounds from yesterday's conversation still burned fresh. Instead, she resolved to take control in a way that was both bold and tender. She would create a space where she was celebrated, surrounded by those who truly valued her. The idea came suddenly, as if whispered by the very hope she had been seeking. Why wait for her family's recognition when she could build a new circle of connection? Martha decided to organize a community gathering to celebrate her birthday. Not a somber occasion marked by absence, but a joyful event filled with friendship, laughter, and the warmth she craved. She envisioned her small backyard transformed into a haven of light, with neighbors and friends gathered around tables laden with food and flowers, music drifting through the air like a balm for her lonely heart. With renewed purpose, Martha set about making plans. She reached for her well-worn address book, fingers trembling as she penned invitations to neighbors she knew from years of shared smiles and casual chats. There was Mr. Thompson, the retired schoolteacher who always stopped to admire her garden, the Martinez family, who brought over homemade tamales during the holidays, and Emily, the young mother whose children Martha had watched grow. Each name was a thread weaving a new tapestry of community, one that promised acceptance and joy. As the invitations were mailed, Martha felt a stirring of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was uncharted territory, stepping beyond the familiar confines of family to embrace a wider circle. Would they come? Would they understand her need to be seen and celebrated? The questions lingered, but Martha pushed them aside, focusing instead on the possibilities. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Martha baked her favorite apple pies, dusted with cinnamon and sugar, filling her kitchen with memories of simpler times. She hung string lights in the backyard and arranged chairs around a long table, placing fresh wildflowers in mason jars collected over the years. Each detail was a labor of love, a declaration that she mattered, that her life was worth celebrating regardless of the shadows cast by family neglect. Yet, beneath the preparations, a quiet tension simmered. Martha's family remained distant and unresponsive. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. It stung more deeply than before. The contrast between their silence and the warmth she was cultivating in her community stark and painful. She grappled with feelings of rejection, wondering if her efforts might only widen the gap between them. One afternoon, as she folded freshly laundered linens, Martha's youngest granddaughter, Lily, stopped by unexpectedly. The child's eyes were wide with curiosity as she took in the preparations. "Grandma, what's all this for?" she asked, tugging gently at Martha's sleeve. "It's a party, sweetie," Martha replied, her voice soft but firm. "A celebration of life, friendship, and the people who care about me." Lily's smile was radiant. "Can I help?" she asked eagerly, picking up a string of lights. Together they decorated the yard, laughter filling the spaces where sadness had once dwelled. For a brief moment, Martha felt the warmth of connection she had longed for, a balm to the ache of neglect. But as Lily's mother appeared at the gate, casting a wary glance, Martha sensed the unspoken tension still lingering within her family. Despite the complexities, Martha pressed on. She sent reminders to neighbors, posted modest flyers at the local library and grocery store, and confided in Mrs. Jenkins, whose unwavering support became a steady source of comfort. "You're doing something beautiful, Martha," Mrs. Jenkins said one afternoon, squeezing her hand. "Sometimes family isn't just who we're born to, but who chooses to stand beside us." The day before the gathering, Martha sat quietly in her garden, watching the roses sway in the gentle breeze. She reflected on the journey she had undertaken in just a few days, from loneliness and hurt to courage and hope. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, that confronting her family's indifference would require strength she wasn't sure she still possessed. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of empowerment, a quiet promise that she would no longer be defined by their neglect. As twilight deepened, Martha lit a small lantern and placed it by the garden gate, a beacon not only for her guests but for herself. The light flickered softly, a symbol of resilience and the possibility of renewal. Tomorrow she would open her home and heart to those who cared, embracing a community that saw her worth. And perhaps in that light, her family would find their way back, or she would discover a new kind of family waiting just beyond the horizon. The morning of the birthday gathering dawned crisp and clear, sunlight spilling into Martha's backyard where tables were set with colorful cloths, mismatched chairs arranged in welcoming circles, and the scent of fresh flowers mingled with the promise of new beginnings. Martha moved slowly but with purpose, her hand steady as she placed the last of the homemade pies on the dessert table. Her heart fluttered with nervous anticipation, unsure of what the day would bring but certain that whatever happened, she was reclaiming her story. As neighbors began to arrive, the yard filled with warmth and laughter. Children darted between the tables, their gleeful shrieks weaving through conversations that blossomed like spring flowers. Mr. Thompson, the retired teacher, brought a basket of freshly baked rolls, while the Martinez family arrived bearing tamales wrapped in corn husks, their smiles wide and genuine. Emily and her children settled in with eager chatter, and even Mrs. Jenkins appeared, her eyes bright with pride. Martha moved among her guests with quiet grace, accepting hugs and kind words, each one a balm to the wounds left by her family's absence. Here, in this circle of friends and neighbors, she felt seen and valued in a way that had been elusive for so long. The day unfolded like a dream, sunlight dappling the garden and music drifting softly from an old radio set on the porch. Then, just as Martha began to relax into the joy of the moment, a sudden murmur rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward the driveway where a car pulled in slowly, its engine humming softly but carrying with it a weight of years and unspoken tensions. Martha's breath caught as she recognized the figures stepping out, her family arriving unexpectedly. Her eldest daughter appeared first, face flushed with a mix of guilt and uncertainty. Behind her, her son and a few grandchildren followed, their expressions guarded, eyes flickering between Martha and the gathering. The contrast between the warmth surrounding Martha and the cool distance of her family was stark, like sunlight meeting shadow. For a moment, silence held the air captive. Then Martha rose from her chair, a steady calm settling over her as she approached them. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "I didn't expect you," she said simply, meeting her daughter's eyes. Her daughter swallowed hard, words catching in her throat. We heard about the party," she said haltingly. "We wanted to come." Martha nodded slowly, sensing the complex emotions beneath the surface: regret, defensiveness, fear of confrontation. The other family members shuffled awkwardly, unsure where to stand in this space that Martha had created without them. The other guests watched quietly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and support. Martha turned back to them briefly, then resumed her conversation with her family, inviting them to join the gathering. Some hesitated before stepping forward. Others lingered at the edges, caught between belonging and estrangement. As the afternoon deepened, the party transformed into a fragile meeting ground where old wounds and new possibilities clashed and intertwined. Conversations began cautiously, tentative threads weaving toward understanding. Martha's son spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I didn't realize how much you've been hurting," he confessed. "We've been so caught up in our own lives that we forgot to be there for you." The admission hung in the air, a fragile bridge forming across years of silence. Martha's daughter added quietly, "I'm sorry for how we've treated you. We didn't mean to hurt you." Martha listened, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and lingering pain. She shared her own feelings, not with accusations but with honesty. "I raised you all with love," she said, voice steady. "I wanted to be part of your lives, to celebrate with you. When I was ignored, it felt like I didn't matter." Tears welled in her eyes, and some of her family members reached out hesitantly, hands trembling as they closed the distance. The gathering became a space for raw, honest conversations, confessions of neglect, expressions of regret, and tentative steps toward healing. Yet, beneath the surface, Martha sensed the fractures that had long shaped their relationships. The old patterns of misunderstanding and hurt were still there, not easily erased by a single afternoon. But in this moment, surrounded by friends and family alike, she stood firm in her resolve. She would no longer allow herself to be sidelined or silenced. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting golden light across the yard, Martha found herself holding her granddaughter Lily's hand tightly. The child's bright eyes mirrored a future filled with hope, a reminder that family was not just about blood, but about the love and respect they chose to nurture. Her family lingered, reluctant to leave this new space they had entered together. Some spoke of wanting to do better, to be present not just for birthdays but for the everyday moments they had missed. Others remained quiet, processing the flood of emotions stirred by the day. Martha felt a profound shift within herself, a mixture of strength and vulnerability that she had not known she could hold simultaneously. The party had become more than a celebration of her birthday. It was a declaration that she would no longer be invisible, that her voice mattered, and that healing was possible, even in the face of deep wounds. As evening settled in, the guests slowly departed, leaving Martha surrounded by soft shadows and the lingering scent of flowers. Her family stayed a little longer, sharing a quiet meal beneath the stars, tentative but present. Martha watched them, feeling the weight of years and the fragile promise of change. The fractures between them were not yet healed, but the cracks allowed light to filter through, a light she was determined to follow. That night, as she prepared for bed, Martha held the photo album close once more. The faces smiling back at her seemed different somehow, older, yes, but also marked by the possibility of renewal. She whispered a quiet prayer for strength and patience, knowing that the journey ahead would require both. Yet, for the first time in a long while, Martha allowed herself to hope. The warmth she had found among her community had not only filled a void, but had given her the courage to face her family with open eyes and an open heart. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, beneath the soft glow of the moon, Martha felt a peace born from resilience. A peace that whispered she was not alone, that her story was still unfolding, and that she held the pen. In the days that followed the gathering, a subtle shift began to ripple through Martha's world. The warmth and laughter that had filled her backyard lingered in her heart, a reminder that connection was possible even after years of distance. Yet, the true test lay ahead. Whether her family could move beyond the fragile truce of that afternoon, and begin to rebuild the bridges that had long been neglected. Martha noticed the first signs one afternoon when her phone buzzed with a message from her daughter. It was short, hesitant, but unmistakably sincere. "Can we come by this weekend? I want to talk." The simple words stirred a cautious hope within Martha, mingling with the memories of past disappointments. She knew this was only a first step, but it was a step nonetheless. When her family arrived a few days later, the atmosphere was tentative but charged with unspoken emotions. There were awkward smiles, shared glances, and moments of silence that carried the weight of years. Martha greeted them with a quiet grace, inviting them into the warmth of her living room where the scent of fresh-baked bread still lingered. The conversation began slowly, each person navigating the delicate dance of apology and understanding. Her son spoke first, his voice steady but vulnerable. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. We didn't realize how much our absence hurt you. We want to do better." Her daughter nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm sorry for the times I ignored you or didn't call. I was caught up in my own life, but that's no excuse." Martha listened, allowing their words to wash over her, the hurt mingling with a growing sense of forgiveness. She spoke without bitterness, sharing her own feelings with honesty. "I missed you all more than I can say, but I'm willing to move forward if you are." The family began to share stories, some joyous, others marked by misunderstandings and regrets. They talked about the challenges they had faced, the pressures that had pulled them apart, and the ways they had hurt each other without meaning to. The walls that had seemed so unyielding began to soften, brick by brick. Yet, Martha also sensed that healing would not be instantaneous. Old wounds needed time to mend, and trust required patience. Some family members were more ready to embrace change, while others remained guarded, uncertain of how to bridge the gap. Outside of these family moments, Martha continued to nurture the community bonds she had formed. She found new joy in volunteering at the local library, hosting book clubs, and participating in neighborhood events. The friendships she cultivated there were a source of strength and belonging, filling the spaces her family sometimes left vacant. Mrs. Jenkins became a steadfast companion, often joining Martha for afternoon tea and long conversations about life, resilience, and the unexpected paths to happiness. "You've opened your heart wide, Martha," she said one day, "and in doing so you've created a circle that holds you up when others falter." Martha smiled, feeling the truth of those words deep within her. She realized that her worth was no longer tethered solely to her family's approval. The love she gave and received in her broader community was just as real and vital. In the weeks that followed, tentative apologies turned into regular visits. Phone calls were answered promptly, and invitations to family dinners were extended with genuine intent. While the path to full reconciliation was still unfolding, Martha felt a sense of progress, a fragile but promising beginning. One afternoon, as she sat with her granddaughter Lily in the garden, Martha reflected on the journey she had undertaken. The pain of being ignored on her birthday had sparked a transformation, not only within her, but within those around her. She saw in Lily's bright eyes the possibility of a future where love and respect were freely given and received. Her family, having witnessed the community's embrace of Martha and the strength she had found beyond their circle, began to shift in subtle ways. They listened more, reached out more, and slowly the walls of distance crumbled. Martha knew the road ahead would still hold challenges, but she was no longer afraid. Her experience had taught her that healing required courage, openness, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. She was ready to walk that path, hand in hand with those willing to join her. As the days grew longer and the seasons changed, Martha embraced this new chapter with quiet confidence. Her life was no longer defined by the neglect of a single day, but by the resilience and love that had blossomed in its wake. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her joy, and in doing so she had shown her family, and herself, that it was never too late to begin again. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Martha sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea warming her hands. The house was quiet, but inside her heart, a profound peace had taken root, one that had grown from the trials and triumphs of recent months. She gazed out the window at the garden where her roses bloomed with renewed vibrancy, a living testament to the resilience she had cultivated within herself. Martha's journey from the loneliness of a forgotten birthday to the embrace of community and cautious family reconciliation had reshaped her understanding of love and worth. No longer tethered solely to the approval of her blood relatives, she had discovered that family was as much about chosen connections as it was about shared history. Her phone chimed softly, breaking the stillness. It was a message from her daughter. "Mom, we're coming over this afternoon. Lily wants to bake with you." Martha smiled, a gentle warmth spreading through her chest. Invitations like this had once been rare, but now they came with a sincerity that filled the spaces left hollow for so long. As the afternoon sun bathed the kitchen in golden light, Martha and Lily mixed flour and sugar, laughter bubbling between them like a fresh spring. The scent of cinnamon and apples filled the air, weaving memories that felt both new and timeless. Martha looked at her granddaughter's radiant face and saw in her eyes the promise of a future shaped by the lessons of the past, a future where love was nurtured and celebrated openly. Later, as the family gathered around the table, Martha felt the gentle transformation that had taken place. Apologies had been spoken, wounds acknowledged, and bridges built with tender care. Though the scars of neglect had not vanished, they no longer defined the relationships. Instead, there was a growing foundation of respect and understanding, fragile yet full of hope. Martha reflected on the strength she had found, not just in confronting her family, but in reaching beyond them to a community that had embraced her with open arms. The neighbors who had once been mere acquaintances had become steadfast friends, their support a lifeline when familial ties had faltered. Together, they had created a tapestry of connection that enriched her life in unexpected ways. One evening, as Martha sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, her daughter joined her, settling quietly beside her. The silence between them was comfortable, a stark contrast to the tension that had once filled their conversations. "Thank you, Mom," her daughter said softly, "for your patience, your strength. You showed us what family really means." Martha smiled, her eyes glistening with tears she no longer fought back. "We're all learning," she replied. "Family is not perfect. It's messy, complicated. But if we keep choosing love, maybe that's enough." In the days that followed, Martha continued to nurture both her community ties and her renewed family relationships. She volunteered at the local senior center, sharing stories and laughter, and hosted gatherings that celebrated life's simple joys. Her home became a haven, not just for herself but for those who sought connection, comfort, and acceptance. Through it all, Martha understood that her true story was not one of pain or neglect, but of empowerment and transformation. She had turned a day of being ignored into a catalyst for change that rippled far beyond a single birthday. Her courage had inspired others to see her not as an invisible figure to be overlooked, but as a woman of strength, dignity, and love. On a quiet morning surrounded by the faces of those she loved, chosen and born, Martha felt a profound gratitude. The journey had been difficult, marked by tears and heartache, but it had led her to a place where her self-worth was unshakable. She had reclaimed her narrative, rewriting it with hope and resilience. As she closed the photo album one last time, Martha whispered to herself, "I am enough, I am loved, and I will continue to choose joy." And with that, she stepped into the future she had forged, stronger, wiser, and surrounded by the family she had always deserved.